This will be a partial reading of my new book, Yahweh and Satan, The Genesis of a New Order of the Ages. I'm not going to read it fully, I'm just going to give you the general premise of the book and the evidence, some of the stronger pieces of evidence that I have to prove that premise of the book, that Yahweh is Satan. I want to also define what is Satan. Now, Satan derives from the Hebrew ha-shatan, which, like English, Hebrew, when an article is used, a definitive article, such as ha, which is the, if it was to be translated into English, that can never be a name. It can't be a personal name, it can't be a surname or anything like that. So ha-shatan literally is the adversary. It is a title applied to, it seems from the reading, one character. It is used directly about 27 times in the Old Testament. And it seems like that in the Old Testament, ha-shatan and Yahweh are not oppositional characters in terms of enemies. And in fact, you read throughout the Old Testament that Yahweh, consorts with lying spirits of destruction, angels of destruction, that he actually orders them to sow misery, chaos, murder and mayhem throughout the world on his behalf. So in this instance, the New Testament character that we read of as the devil or Satan actually may not be the same ha-shatan as the Old Testament, right? Again, that Satan or ha-shatan is merely a title to describe something. It is not a name of a single character, right? You would never call someone the Joseph or the Michael, right? When you employ the definitive article, you are thus, like English, Hebrew is exactly the same. You're turning that noun into almost a title, a mantle, to describe the characteristics of something, right? It's an appellation, even a moniker in many ways. And contrast in the Old Testament's use or lack of use of the ha-shatan appellation or moniker, we see in the New Testament it almost takes on a whole new dimension of meaning. It's used about 66 times in the New Testament, and the character, because the way it's used in the New Testament, it seems to be that it is the devil, Satan. It is describing a character that is called Satan or the devil, the evil one, the god of this world. And this seemingly new theological character in the New Testament is fleshed out. Again, as I've stated, it's given a new dimension of meaning. And so the New Testament Satan is what we are really discussing here, but we're contrasting it to Yahweh. So the descriptions of Yahweh in the Old Testament, we're going to see how they relate to the Satan of the New Testament. Okay, so it's not the ha-shatan character of the Old Testament that we're discussing here. I just want to make that clear. It's the Satan of the New Testament that we're contrasting or comparing to Yahweh of the Old Testament. So I want you to bear in mind, by the way, just before we go through all of this, we read in Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9. So this is, the question still remains. So if Yahweh is Satan, who's the God of the Bible? Or just who is God? So we get the answer in Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9. This also appears, by the way, in Psalm 82 verse either 1 or 2, and it makes the same assertion in that verse regarding the potential henotheism. I say potential, I mean it's a strong indication of henotheism within the Israelite religion, within Abrahamism. Henotheism is the belief, or it's the subscribing to the position that there are many gods in existence, but that we should only worship one above all others. Quote, when the Most High, in the Hebrew it's Elyon, literally the Most High God, El Elyon, divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's, or Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob is the lot of his inheritance, unquote. So we see this throughout the Bible, actually, the Old Testament, where it's, even in the Shema prayer, it states Adonai Eloheinu. What does that mean? It means the Lord is God. If the Lord was God, if the Lord was the Most High, which we're seeing the distinction in those two verses there in Deuteronomy 32, between the Most High, or Elyon, El Elyon, and Yahweh, if the Lord was God, then you would merely just call him God. And we even see throughout, for example, Numbers 31, we'll discuss that, where it mentions that the Lord your God, it will always use that phraseology, the Lord your God. Again, if the Lord was God, and he was a universal God, why is he described as the Lord your God? Right? If he was God, and if he was the God of all people, why be specific and say just your God in reference to the seed of Jacob, and that he is God, that we also have to, to describe him as God, in contrast to his primary mantle of the Lord. So to begin, Yahweh is Satan, or the adversary. 1 Peter 5:8, this is the New Testament figure of Satan. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, Satan, the devil, walketh about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. This is then reflected in Hosea 13 verse 8, where it describes Yahweh as, so like a lion I will pounce on them, like a leopard I will lurk by the path, like a bear robbed of her cubs I will attack them and will tear open their chests. There I will devour them like a lion, like a wild beast, would tear them apart, unquote. Moreover, we also see further context of this in Hosea 11:10, where it describes again Yahweh as, they will follow the Lord, he will roar like a lion, when he roars his children will come trembling from the west. Furthermore, we see in Psalm 50:22, repent, all of you who forget me, or I will tear you apart, and no one will help you. Again, it's the same lion symbolism here, right? Moreover, the idea of a flawed and jealous God, the G being uncapitalized there, is far more in keeping with Satan, or the adversary of humanity, and God. Another connection between Satan and Yahweh is contained here. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. This appears in Luke 10, verse 9, 17 and 18. And compare that with Psalm 18, verse 12 to 13. Out of the brightness of his presence, clouds advanced. With hailstones and bolts of lightning, the Lord, or Yahweh, thundered from heaven, unquote. That also links with the Book of Enoch, and where the secret societies first began, or where they trace their lineage back to, through Kabbalah and all the way back to this character in the Book of Enoch called Samyaza. Samyaza, etymologically, most likely derives from a Semitic root, which means one who stares up, or one, in this context, the one who stares at heaven. So by that, what we mean is that when Samyaza, or Samael, or Yahweh, or Satan, Lucifer, when he descended to heaven, he was stuck as the god of this world, right, as we read in 2 Corinthians 4:4, and we'll get to that just in a minute. He, to steal a quote from Oscar Wilde, he was stuck in the gutters looking at the stars. That's why we see the likes of the Tower of Babel myth, the cautionary myth, where it discusses this idea of centralizing all power, all knowledge, trying to reach up to the lofty heights of heaven, you know, forever building upwards, looking upwards, you know. This is something, this idea, the shadow that lurks in the psyche of man, where he seeks to conquer his creator. Not even the creator, but to conquer that shining light within the void, within the darkness. He seeks to assimilate it into the shadow. And this is really tied up with this idea, this Gnostic notion of, say, Yaldabaoth, the begetter of the void, or Yaldabaoth, the child of chaos, the child of chaos. And also of Choronzon, the dweller in the abyss. That thing, like Yahweh is, like Saturn or Kronos or time itself. This is what these people worship, the seed of Jacob. They worship time. These are all gods of time, the Leontocephaline, the lion-headed god, the lion-headed demiurge of Yaldabaoth, the demiurge meaning creator. They worship the god of time. Another term for him in the Persian is Zervan. And he is the god of thresholds. He is the one who holds the key. That's why you see within the Vatican, the street is shaped like a key. You have the keys all over the flag. Of course, these are supposedly the keys to heaven. But if you worship God, if you revere God, if you are in loyalty to God, then why would you have to sequester the keys to heaven? Why would you even need the keys to heaven? For devotion to God, the walking of the righteous path, being in close connection with God, you know, gaining theosis with Him. That is the key itself to heaven, to peace. Yet, like everything that the Vatican does and all of these other various materialist, occult institutions, Kabbalah, Abrahamism, all of this, they believe that the key is a physical thing, like what we see in the Tower of Babel, that they physically have to reach heaven. That heaven, they believe, is a physical domain, or it can be materialized. So this entity is the god of thresholds. Choronzon is as well. This is the god of thresholds. That's what the abyss is. It is the shadow of the psyche. It's incomprehensible to us. It is the veil that clouds our mind. And of course, Yahweh is the author of confusion, even though he mentions he is not. He is absolutely the author of confusion. He mentions it himself in a contradictive way. Within the Old Testament, he mentions it, that he sows confusion, he sends forth terror and disorder and chaos. But of course, according to the New Testament, it states that God cannot be the author of confusion, right? So therefore, we must conclude that Yahweh, according to the New Testament, is not God. However, we'll get to all of that. 2 Corinthians 4:4, Satan, who is the god of this world. Contrast that to Psalm 47 verse 2-3. The Lord Most High, or Yahweh, is wonderful. He is the great King over all the earth. He defeated nations for us. For who? For the seed of Jacob. And put them under our control. So he's a god who plays favourites, right? And he's a god of this world, like what Satan is. On the Christian identity, leaders now demand and we proclaim Yahweh the God of all. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 13-15. For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers, masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. This is the same thing we find within the occult corpus, where it describes Choronzon, this dweller of the abyss, or even of Yaldabaoth, the lion-headed, serpent-bodied demiurge, the creator who was created, the creator of this garden, if you will. That he is described as having no substance, but appearing as though he has substance, right? That he is the deepest shadow, but appears as though he is a blinding light. It's a bit like what we see in the modern world today, rather than that one values the froth and how it aesthetically appears, than actually, sipping the contents of the beer and seeing how the beer actually is, right? I think it was Richard Nixon has stated that everything in this world is based on aesthetics. It's based on sort of shallow, superficial, facile vanity. Not just facile, but facile and fleeting vanity. That the contents of one's character is not what is most valued. It's not what is exalted within this culture, because this is a culture under Yahweh. It's a culture under the dweller of the abyss, under the lion-faced Hierophant who roams about like a lion, seeking who he may devour, right? He is a liar. He was a liar from the beginning. Continuing on, it is not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. Indeed, keep it in mind that Satan, or the enemy of humanity, masquerades as an angel of light, as Yahweh himself, even though he viciously seeks to bring about mayhem and murder into our midst, claims that he is good. Yahweh and Satan were both likened to Leviathan and dragons. Psalm 18, verse 7 to 8. Then the earth shook and trembled, the foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken. Because he was wroth, there went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. Then we read, so that's a description of Yahweh. Then we read the almost verbatim description of Leviathan in Job 41, verses 19 to 21. Flames stream from its mouth, sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze. And we have additionally in Job 4 verse 9, at the breath of God, at the breath of Yahweh, they perish. At the blast of his anger, they are no more. Contrast that to Satan in the New Testament, as we read in Revelation 12 verse 7 to 9, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. This also ties in with Sam Yaza in the Book of Enoch. And the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world, right? Deceives the whole world. How could he do that? How could he deceive the whole world? Well, the only way to deceive mankind is to appear as though you are good, is to appear as though you are God, right? When you're not God, you are Yahweh, the tetragrammaton, the four-lettered word. You are missing the Godhead. You are missing the fifth point, the fifth element, the Spirit, right? You are the mere four elements, if you will. I believe Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, you can identify that as the Hebraic acronym for the four elements within Hebrew, right? That's one etymology of that tetragrammaton. So yes, Yahweh, who deceived the entire world, he was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. We see Yahweh had a whole host of angels, right? A whole host of angels with him. Lying spirits, he consorted with them. He consorted with the angel of destruction. That seemed to be the right-hand man of Yahweh. even from the book of Ezekiel, he's on a throne of fire. He is a silhouette amidst the fire that surrounds him. I mean, you read the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel's vision, it is absolutely devilish. What real angels actually look like, the angels of Yahweh, right, the Baal Yehovah, right, the Lord Yahweh, is absolutely demonstrably evil. There's no other words for it. They're horrific, monstrous. And he was cast to the earth. We just read, right? Of course, the New Testament states that Yahweh is the God, Satan is the God of this world. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4. And then Psalm 47, verses 2 to 3. The Lord Most High is wonderful. He is the great King over all the earth. How can you be the great King over all the earth and also be casting down your enemies to the earth? So therefore, they're not your enemies anymore. Because you control the earth, you would smite them, you would destroy them. There would be no more. You've just fought a war in heaven against them. But the only way this makes sense is that Yahweh was cast to earth. He infected the minds, the psyche of humanity through knowledge, through tempting him, right? As we read of in the New Testament, where Jesus Christ was tempted by Satan. How was he tempted? Satan said that he would give him essentially the entire world, that he would make him king over the entire world. What do we read of in the Old Testament? That Yahweh promises that the chosen, the seed of Jacob, is loyal to him and him alone, that he will provide for them a new world order, a kingdom that will stretch from one horizon to the next, right? Stretch across the entire world, that the entire world will be destroyed. All peoples will bow down before them and lick the dust from the soles of their feet. Again, exactly like Satan. So digressing, I'm getting off on a tangent here. I'm actually not sticking to the book. However, I get into all of this throughout the book. You'll read all of this. So continuing on, contrast that, right, that Revelation 12 passage, or the two verses there, to Isaiah 34 verse 4. Quote, all the stars in the sky will be dissolved and the heavens rolled up like a scroll. So this is Yahweh's judgment upon the nations and upon the host of heaven. All the starry host, or the host of heaven, will fall like withered leaves from the vine, like shriveled figs from the fig tree. Thus Yahweh will destroy the host of heaven, whereas Satan was driven from heaven, and of course would have had that retributive spirit, that retributive drive against heaven for this absolute besmirchment of his reputation, this disreputable act against him in his eyes, this absolutely unforgivable act against Satan. So this denotes that both Yahweh and Satan possess a contention with heaven. Satanism, that which is adversarial, is generally associated with human sacrifice in the modern sense. Let us investigate if Yahweh also commanded this heinous act. As we know, Yahweh, like Satan, is like a roaring lion seeking who he may devour. Judges 11 verse 29 to 39. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites, and Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, again this is the same satanic idea that you worship the Lord because the Lord grants you power, not because he is God, not because you seek this, individuation or spiritual oneness. You seek power. You follow the Lord because you seek power, right? Whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return, and triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's if he gives over to me the Ammonites, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. So he subdued Ammon through the rest of that passage. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said, and let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin, unquote. This is a sacrifice, which is why we see in the binding of Isaac by Abraham that Abraham thought nothing of the Lord demanding the sacrifice of his firstborn. We shall include more passages to this effect, but firstly let us analyse the Hebrew of this passage to ensure we have ascertained the correct meaning, and this is not just a poor error. Firstly, we have the Hebrew, which outrightly indicates that it was not consecration. It was literally a sacrifice. The Hebrew it's used as its root, olah, or ol, means to raise up like smoke into the air. And of course that appears in Leviticus 4 verse 31, where Yahweh states that the burning fat, is a pleasing aroma to the Lord, to Yahweh. How can this be the God of the cosmos that demands such things? And of course the Judges 11:31, where this burnt offering, or this offer up a burnt offering to Yahweh, and we know it's to Yahweh because the lamed prepositional prefix is used, so it literally means for Yahweh or to Yahweh. We read in the Hebrew v'hale tuhu olah, which literally means and I will offer it up as a burnt offering, or literally I will raise up a sacrifice to you. I will raise up a burnt offering to you. You know, the smoke rising. It's literally the translation from the Hebrew for Judges 11 verse 31. And of course, and as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you've brought me very low." Why did he tear his clothes? Right? The reason he tore at his clothes is because he damn well knew he would have to kill his daughter. He was not consecrating her. He was not dedicating her. Well, he was actually, but we're going to get into why consecration or dedication did not mean merely to dedicate or consecrate to temple service, right? Because that term, consecrate or dedicate, is also used in reference to animals. Animals were not dedicated. They were not consecrated or dedicated to temple service, to the services in the temple, to the daily business of the temple, of course. They were taken out into the courtyard and burnt as an offering to the Lord, right? Because as we read in Leviticus 4, it was an aroma, the burning fat was an aroma pleasing to the Lord. We further read in Numbers 31 verses 32 to 41, quote, "The plunder remaining from the spoils that the soldiers took was 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 women who had never slept with a man. The half share of those who fought in the battle was 337,500 sheep, of which the tribute for the Lord was 675, 36,000 cattle, of which the tribute for the Lord was 72, 30,500 donkeys, of which the tribute for the Lord was 61, 16,000 people, of whom the tribute for the Lord was 32. And of the 16,000 women, that is, the virgins, 32 persons were paid as the tribute or the tax to the Lord. Why would a God of the universe need terror-stricken and enslaved virgins? Is that not what a god of the world or satanic entity would desire? He also mentions, by the way, I believe it is in Numbers 31, that all of the silver, gold and bronze needs to be put into the treasury of the Lord, right? Again, why would the Lord, the supposed God of the universe, need silver, gold and bronze? Then why would he need it in a physical, material coffer at his temple? None of this makes any sense at all, right? You have to really check your brain at the door to believe this nonsense. So the word used for female is hashalah, right? Which can also mean, it can mean booty. Comparing with the previous context of the passage, all the virgins were kept alive, and the rest of the women that had felt the warmth of a man were murdered. Numbers 31, verse 18. We also read in verse 17 that all of the children, all of the male children were, or what are called the male little ones, they're all murdered, everyone, by the command of the Lord. I will get to the horridness of that passage, which actually sees Yahweh commanding paedophilic sex slavery by the sword. Also genocide, but that is a recurrent theme throughout the Old Testament. Upon that full passage, we see Moses, the harbinger of Yahweh, and thus acting on behalf of his Lord, command paedophilic sex slavery. Numbers 31, verse 9 to 18. The Israelites captured the Midianite women and children and took all the Midianite herds, flocks, and goods as plunder. They burned all the towns where the Midianites had settled, as well as all their camps. They took all the plunder and spoils, including the people and animals, and brought the captives, spoils and plunder to Moses and Eleazar, the priest and the Israelite assembly at their camp on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. Moses, Eleazar, the priest, and all the leaders of the community went to meet them outside the camp. Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of the thousands and commanders of hundreds, who returned from the battle. "Have you allowed all the women to live?" he asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man, unquote. At that time, they married and consummated young, so these girls are probably 8 to 12 years of age, and they are being forced into sex slavery on the commands of Moses, Yahweh's harbinger. Why else are they saving for themselves every girl who has never slept with a man? Right? But why would they do that? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. Right? So kill all the boys. That's basically even babies, infants. We're going to get into other instances throughout the Old Testament where they talk about ripping up the wombs of pregnant women. Blessed is he who dashes the children or the babes' heads against the rocks, and all of this. And also you have in the Bible too, the Old Testament, the bitter potion or the bitter drink. And in essence, it's a sort of remedy for abortion, right? This is an absolute monster of a deity. It is not the God of the universe. It's not, as we've already read from Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9, it is not the God of the universe. Like Satan, it masquerades as an angel of light. It masquerades as the God of the universe. That is how it has deceived the entire world, right? And it's deceived the entire world at the by the assistance of those who have deceived, the American evangelical crowd, who sing their praises, who would see an entire country absolutely purged of all people so that it can be colonized for Eretz Israel Hashlema, right, the greater Israel. Deuteronomy 13 verses 16 to 17, quote, "Thou shalt surely smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, destroying it utterly, and all that is therein, and the cattle thereof, with the edge of the sword. And then you shall gather all of its booty." The word used there, by the way, is hashalah. Shalah, it could include garments, gold and silver. We see that in Joshua 7 verse 21. Ornaments that we see in Judges 8 verses 24 to 25 with the instance of that word. Fabrics and women in Judges 5 verse 30, and flocks and herds, 1 Samuel 30 verses 20, Jeremiah 49 verse 32, 2 Chronicles 15 verse 11. It can also mean persons, Deuteronomy 20 verse 14. Twice in the verse that word appears, shalah, or booty, as it's translated in Deuteronomy 30 verses 16 to 17. It can also mean garments, food and drink, 2 Chronicles 28:15, etc. So, it can mean everything from women to fabrics to ornaments, everything that's potential booty for a soldier. "Then you shall gather all its booty into the middle of its open square, and burn the city and all its booty with fire as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God." So basically you take all of the booty and all of the population into the square, into the open square, and you burn it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God. Mass immolation, a mass sacrifice to Yahweh. Mass sacrifice. So again, the Lord your God, you see that instance of the Lord your God. So that implies that the Lord isn't God. He's merely one of several gods, but he is the God of the seed of Jacob. Again, from the Shema prayer, Adonai Eloheinu, the Lord is God. If the Lord was God, you would simply just call him God. "And it shall be a ruin forever, it shall never be rebuilt." So as we see from that passage, females, it was a custom for females to be burnt as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God, right? So Jephthah sacrificed his daughter. He burnt her. He immolated her as a burnt offering unto the Lord. Of note too, you will see throughout the Old Testament that the phrase "the Lord your God" implies Henotheism, or the fact that the Lord is one of many gods. Again, as we've mentioned, see Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9. See also Psalm 82 verse 1. However, if the Lord was God, then why not simply call him God? Moreover, it is logical to state that God, given his zero order and incomprehensible status, has no name, and the term God, from a Proto-Germanic etymological root meaning to pour, is merely a general term of description for a force that has no name, no characteristics, and no form, for it is the self-actuating principle of the universe, and cannot be properly understood within the confines of the understanding of those who reside in existence. 1 Kings 22 verse 11. "And Zedekiah, the son of Chenana, made for himself horns of iron, and said, Thus says the Lord, with these you shall push the Syrians until they are destroyed." Horns of iron, right? Horns of iron. Again, what does Satan have on his head from popular myth, if you will, from the popular illustrations of Satan? Yes, the horns. Why does he have horns? because remember, he's a wild beast, right? He's of the earth. Leviticus 26, verses 27 to 29. You shall, as a command in Yahweh, use cannibalism as a disciplinary measure. This is naturally strange for a God who could speak his will into existence, but now he is forced to use materially based emotional trickery and fear to get his will, to materialize his will into existence. We read, quote, "If in spite of this you still do not listen to me, but continue to be hostile towards me, then in my anger I will be hostile towards you, and I myself will punish you for your sins 7 times over." So again, disproportionate punishment and collective punishment. Whimsical, impulsive punishment. You will eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. I will destroy your high places, cut down your incense altars, and pile your dead bodies. So if you don't follow the Lord, you will be forced to eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. He will destroy your high places and cut down your incense altars and pile your dead bodies. Right? Again, this is primarily just to the seed of Jacob, because he's using them almost exclusively, still to this day, to enact his will. And what is this will? Who is this Yahweh? Well, essentially Yahweh is an egregoric, fictitious character that has been created by the priest class. That's why we read, for example, that the silver, the gold, and the bronze in Numbers 31 are to be, taken to the Lord's coffers. To be placed in the coffers of the Lord. What they mean is that the coffers of the Lord is merely a synonym, it's a byword, a sort of pseudonym, if you will, for the true power behind all of this, which is the priest class. They wrote the character of Yahweh. They created the character of Yahweh to enact their own will, to emotionally trick people through fear and cajoling and beguilement into enacting their will. It's a very ancient form of psychological warfare. That is what the Old Testament, that is what the Bible is, in fact. It is psychological warfare. It is the greatest marketing campaign to have ever graced the face of the earth, right? Deuteronomy 28, verses 53 to 57. "And you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you, in the siege and in the distress with which your enemies shall distress you. The man who is the most tender and refined among you will begrudge food to you." Jeremiah is casting a warning in the next passage, a prophet of Yahweh and thus an exerciser of his will, by virtue of him being a prophet, of course. Jeremiah 19, verse 9. "And I will cause them to eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters." I will cause, right? This is Yahweh supposedly speaking. I will cause them to eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters. I will cause that, right? I will cause it directly. That's a direct, explicit verb, explicit action. "And they shall eat every one the flesh of his friend in the siege and traitness, wherewith their enemies, and they that seek their lives shall straiten them," unquote. As we read in Genesis 22, verse 2, "He, Yahweh, said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you." The reason Abraham did this, he didn't question it, right? He didn't say, that's strange, Lord, that's not like you, right? He did it unquestionably because Yahweh is a God or a Lord who likes the sweet aroma of the burnt offering of flesh, right? He likes the fat, right? He likes burning fat. It's a an aroma that pleases him. Numbers 29 verse 8, you shall present a burnt offering to the Lord as a sweet aroma, 1 young bull, 1 ram, and 7 lambs in their first year. So he likes them young as well, right? Be sure they are without blemish. So again, we see the same thing, without blemish, like in terms of a woman who is, he likes them without blemish, who are virgins essentially, right? Also see Leviticus 1 verse 9. It says, the priest is to burn all of it on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. So a food offering, he actually eats this, right? He eats the flesh of the human. In the process of burning it, it's also in essence, like a transubstantiation ritual. He actually eats that, right? Through fire. Because the Lord, Yahweh, is like it's a fire deity. It's mentioned throughout that he is, I think we'll probably get to it actually, he is a sort of burning fire. He is an all-consuming fire that's mentioned of him throughout the Old Testament. We read Joshua 6:24, they burned the city with fire and all that was in it, only the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. Oh, pardon me, that's Joshua 6:24, not Numbers 31, we read that. Joshua 8 verse 8, then it will be when you have seized the city that you shall set the city on fire. You shall do it according to the word of the Lord. What does that mean? They're referring to Leviticus, the burnt offering, right? To burn the whole place is a burnt offering to the Lord because he consumes it. He wants to eat the flesh of the inhabitants, be them animal or human, be them infant or adult. See, I have commanded you, unquote. So Yahweh has commanded this. Satan, the adversary of all mankind, has commanded this. Deuteronomy 7 verse 16, you must destroy. The literal word that's used in Deuteronomy 7:16, the Hebrew word is akala, right? It is a verb meaning literally to eat. So it's translated in the English to destroy. It's actually, the true translation is, you must eat all the peoples the Lord your God gives over to you. Do not look on them with pity and do not serve their gods, for that will be a snare to you, unquote. So I'll provide another set of notes on my breakdown of this passage and the cannibalism present in the rabbinical tradition and Tanakh. So we read of in the Kitos War from the Roman and Greek sources. This is the war of the rebellion of the diaspora, where we read that this was in the early centuries, so the 2nd century AD, the early 100s AD, where we read that they slaughtered great swathes of colonies of Greeks and Romans throughout the Levant, and they used their entrails or their intestines as belts and adorned themselves with their skin. The Hebrews did, and they ate their flesh. They were cutting off pieces of flesh, roasting it, and eating it. So cannibalizing the corpses of the Romans and Greeks. And by the way, according to the to Talmudic tradition, it's not advised to eat humans. It's not necessarily virtuous per se, but it's not a sin. It's not something that's considered taboo. It's not meat that's off the menu, should we say. It's not like the flesh of pig, or I believe the flesh of a mouse as well, right? It's not like that. So those are bad. Don't eat bacon. But we're unsure of the flesh of the human, right? You might be able to eat that. It's not advised, but you can get away with it. It's not a sin. Why is it not a sin? Because of what we're reading from the Hebrew of Deuteronomy 7 verse 16. You must eat all the peoples the Lord your God gives over to you. Now again, there's other passages that use that term, that verb, akala, the Hebrew verb for eat, and it has been translated as destroy, even in the Talmud, right? It's been conveyed in that sense, to have that meaning, destroy. But you can see it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination, a stretch of interpretation, to see that, well, this may mean to actually eat, because akala literally is to eat, to put something in your mouth, to eat it, not just to devour in that sort of theatrical sense as we use it in English, right? To devour, to destroy. It's actually to eat, right? It's the same verb as in the English to eat, to put something in your mouth, to consume it, right? So continuing on, 1 Samuel 15 verse 3, now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkey, unquote. Basically kill the babies as well. Does this sound like the God of the universe speaking? Or does this sound like Satan, the God of this world, the adversary of all mankind? 1 Samuel chapter 6 verse 19, and he smote the men of Beth Shemesh, because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Even he smote of the people 50,010 men, and the people lamented because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter. Again, Satan, the adversary of all mankind. And look at that collective punishment that's disproportionate. Because the men had looked into the ark of the Lord, he smote 50,070, killed them outright. And the people lamented. They were, filled with terror. Miserable. They weren't happy that this wasn't the good news of the Lord. This is the Lord, a terror-inflicting being, a dweller of the abyss, a Yaldabaoth, a child of chaos. This is not the God, the Most High, El Elyon, the God of the universe. This is the creator that was created, as we read of in the Gnostic tradition. It is Satan. It is Satan. Ha-Shaitan, the adversary of all mankind. Deuteronomy 4, verse 24. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. Again, a jealous God. Why is one jealous? Right? What's, of course we have the source of, is a consuming fire. That idea that we see in the vision of Ezekiel, and even in the burnt offering itself. He's a God of consuming fire, like that of hell, and the Lord who reigns over that pit of Gehinnom. He who we call Satan, the devil, right? He who lords over the ever-burning pit of human refuse. So a jealous God. Why is one jealous? One is jealous because it is an emotion, an emotional response that is elicited from one having or feeling as though they do not have security over a third party that provides to them some sort of value, be it emotional or, material or financial. What does the Lord get from us? Well, if you watch my videos, Yabulon or Jabulon, it's written, and what is Lush, you'll begin to figure out what the Lord gets from us and why he's so covetous, so jealous over us, right? And over our loyalty. So Proverbs 1 verse, and also, by the way, one that is jealous usually implies he doesn't have, he isn't omnipotent. He doesn't have he's not all-powerful. Power deriving from the control over other things. He doesn't have power over us, right? Because he's in a constant state of insecurity over our loyalties, our unwavering, all, totally devoted love to him. Of course, it isn't love. He brings people over to belief in him by smiting them, in droves, by inflicting terror upon them. You don't make someone love you by abusing them. A father who is a good father, who unconditionally loves his children, wouldn't provide his love conditionally, wouldn't provide his favour conditionally, based upon the child's loyalty to him, the child's unwavering obedience to him. The Lord is not your father. He's not your heavenly father. He is an absolute adversarial character. He is the nemesis of all mankind. He is the nemesis of God. Proverbs 1, 26-30. So we read, quote, "And I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. I will mock when your fear cometh. When your fear cometh as desolation." This is Yahweh speaking. "And your destruction cometh as a whirlwind. When distress and anguish cometh upon you, then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me, because they hated knowledge." Because they hated knowledge. What did the serpent in the garden grant Eve? "And they did not choose the fear of the Lord." Fear. Fear. Not love. Fear. This is what this devilish character deals in. "They would have none of my counsel, and they despised all of my reproof." Contrast that Proverbs passage with 1 Corinthians 13, verse 6-7. "And hence Yahweh is not God, because, as we will read further on, God is love." Quote, "Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." That's from the New Testament. As we've just read from that Proverbs passage, that is not the same as Yahweh, as what Yahweh exhibits. He exhibits fear. He delights in evil. He delights in chaos or calamity. He mocks people when the fear comes to them, comes over them. The fear cometh as desolation, right? The fear ruins them, and he delights in all of that. Contrast that with the previous verse of Proverbs 1:26, verse 30, and Deuteronomy 28, verse 63. "And it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you." Remember, love does not delight in evil. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres, and God is love. Right? Yahweh is not love, as we've just read here. So Yahweh cannot be God. Basic reasoning, right? "And to bring you to naught, and ye shall be plucked from off the land, whither thou goest to possess it." Thus Yahweh cannot be God, because God is love, according to 1 John 4, verse 8. "Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love." Repeating that again. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Moreover, fear, as Yahweh seeks to inflict on all of us, as his agents do daily to us, is based around a lack of trust in us and the desire to control rather than protect. The CIA's MKUltra, after 30 or so years of brutal and unethical experimentation on children and adults, concluded that the best way to manipulate the human mind was through fear. No other means of control was more potent than fear. If God is love, then Satan is of fear. Remember, Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. Yahweh appears good and wholesome, Psalm 145 verse 8 to 10 for instance, but as we see is utterly devoid of any moral standard. He is beyond good and bad. He could only be described as utterly nihilistic and terrifyingly cold. Mercurial. Isaiah 45 verse 7, Yahweh states, I form the light and create darkness, I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So I'll get into the rest of the passages, and we'll cover just that brief section. Again, that's just the partial number of quotes linking Yahweh, the Old Testament figure of Yahweh, to the New Testament figure of Satan. This has already went on for an hour or so, this discussion, so I don't want to continue it any further. I'll let you just digest that, and then we'll go for a second part. And if you want to, obviously, have be equipped with every single passage, there's about I believe 500 or so I cite, and then on later sections I go into demystifying the esoteric corpus, the extra biblical and mystical texts that describe Yahweh and go into what Yahweh is and all of that. So if you want that, you can buy the book. The ebook is only £12, which I believe in US dollars is something like $15, and you get 394 pages of, well, essentially you get 394 pages of evidence that proves the NWO is biblical in its origin, and also that Yahweh is Satan, or the old figure of Yahweh, or the Old Testament figure of Yahweh is the New Testament figure of Satan. So thank you, and please like, subscribe and share this video. It helps a great deal, and I will pin a comment in this video linking to where you can buy my new books, and specifically the new book, Yahweh is Satan, the Genesis of a New Order of the Ages. Thank you.